to the next speaker, it's Dr. Carol Henry. Forget that. As a professor of nutrition and dietetics in the College of Pharmacy and Nutrition at the University of Saskatchewan. Carol's research focuses on child health and nutrition, also those aspects within communities as well, food delivery systems, and she's going to be talking today about a project in southern Ethiopia, effectively to enhance food security through intensive pulse crop-based farming systems. So please join me in welcoming Carol to the stage.
Thanks, Andrew. Hello, everyone. I know we're getting exhausted, so hopefully you'll work through this with me. Technology. So 70,000 farmers in southern Ethiopia. Perhaps one way that I like to look at it, or some people like to look at it, is to look at the number of farmers here in Saskatchewan, which is about 36,000. So then that makes it about twice the amount of farmers in southern Ethiopia. And interestingly, these farmers are smallholder, subsistent farmers in rural Ethiopia that we're working with. So I think we've heard a lot about pulse today. This morning we heard that pulse, the use of pulse, makes good economic sense, also health-wise, and also for the environment. And I think we heard the same message this afternoon. In Ethiopia particularly, one of the reasons for pulse is that Ethiopia is a cereal-based economy, and so the pulse then provide a complementary protein source that really helps to enrich the diet. Ethiopia, as Eastern Africa, has a long history of pulse production. And then you may ask why then are we not eating a lot more pulse? And I think probably some of the same reasons as we see here in Saskatchewan. Some people may not know the benefit of it. We did some baseline study. We found that education and awareness was an important thing that needs to happen in order to encourage the use. But pulse also is grown because it can be exported, it's an income crop, and therefore most of the farmers then see this as money. As one female farmer said, "Why should I eat my money?" Another good benefits, though, is that it can be grown as a shoulder crop, and I think this is one of the good reasons why we got into it, is that most of the farmers see this as growing after they have grown some of the main crops like wheat, like maize, and therefore in vulnerable areas where concerns of flood, concerns of drought, then this might be an opportunity then to gain a second crop. And of course, you heard about the agronomic benefits. So the other thing, what does this mean then for the Ethiopian rural family that we've worked with? And I think pulse, for example, not only is it nutritious, but economically, it is quite an inexpensive approach to addressing the diet and diet diversity. It also, we talked about improvement in nutritional status, and I'll show you a little bit of that. And then pulse production and the seed system is a big of interest in Ethiopia, and so this is one of the reasons why this is so important as well. Okay, so what does it mean for Ethiopia? Couple of the things that we look at is malnutrition and addressing micronutrient deficiency. And what we've seen then is that increasing diet diversity, increasing the protein content, increasing the nutritional content of the diet, then it's able to lead to reducing some of the deficiencies that we see. Countries like Ethiopia are moving from not just addressing infectious disease, but they're also looking at some of the non-chronic, non-communicable diseases that we see in industrial countries, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and so forth. And pulse then becomes an important option for addressing those. We heard just recently about the Sustainable Development Goals and how some of these activities then are able to address some of these goals. One of the picture that really caught most of our eyes was the cost of hunger in Ethiopia. And the story that gets told that the ministers, 12 ministers were together and they were talking about the importance of improving malnutrition, better nutrition for improved productivity. And I think it was this particular picture, the cost of hunger that got everyone's attention. That if we can address hunger, then not only are we addressing the very immediate needs of the diet, we want to eat, but we're looking at productivity and how we might be able to address a population that's going to be productive in the future. So I always think that pulse make great economic sense. So where do we stand? And I think I need to go back a little bit and tell you that this project is the growings of it is about 20 years old. So the University of Saskatchewan has had a long and very successful relationship with Hawassa University, which is in the southern part of Ethiopia. And this relationship began with capacity building and has moved on from capacity building, which is training of young people, training of senior scientists, onto the issues of addressing the soil, addressing the plant, which is good agronomic practices, and looking more recently into developing food processing strategies and also addressing awareness and education. And so that's where we have been. We talked about the 70,000 farmers that this has really reached, but in essence, we've done a lot more than that. We found through the research that we've done that those are direct beneficiaries, but then indirectly that we have reached thousands more. We started out by addressing the issues of children, young children, children from 0 to 24 months, and we looked at complementary feeding. And as we continued to look at that, we then started to look at women. And our speaker this morning talked about the role of women, the important role. They're the backbone of the home. They're the backbone of the agricultural society. And we then needed to look at women and to look at ways that we could reduce their burden, but not only reduce their burden, but also address issues of nutrition, of their lifestyle as well. And so, but in doing so, we also wanted to maintain that balance so that we were not just focusing on women to the detriment of male farmers. We had to maintain the balance. We found through the research that we needed a variety of expertise. And so over 20 years, we've built a lot of that expertise. We started out with academia. We started out with some government involvement. Today, though, we're pleased to say that not only are we working with different governments at different level, academies, but we have engaged industry partners, NGOs, local and international. We have grad students in our audience today who are part of that big, dynamic, growing community that we've worked with. And very importantly, we've got our funders who have supported us, which really is the Government of Canada through Global Affairs Canada and IDRC. So when we look at the government extension system that we've worked at, we started out by recognizing that as an international partner, we're going there and we need the help and partnership there in order for this to be sustainable. And so we've worked with the government health extension system structure, which includes district agencies, 1 to 5 networks of women. The Regional Bureau of Agriculture has been very helpful, the Regional Bureau of Health, and very recently, the Bureau of Women, Children, and Youth. So that's how we've continued to build the partnership, or what we call the framework then, that is helping us to work in a sustainable way. We started out in small, which is to look at about 3 to 5 research sites. And in our last phase 3, we had about 15 research sites. If you know Ethiopia, you'll see the map of Ethiopia. If you don't, it just suggests that we are at the southern end. Ethiopia is a landlocked country, and with that, we do have some challenges, the recent drought, the floods, and some of those things that have been challenges for us. The project itself was divided into 3 phases. We began at the baseline, which really looked at, well, if we are going to develop a large community engaged economy, then we need to start at baseline by doing some pilot work. And we did those works in soil, in agronomy. We also did that in nutrition. And so with those work and with the capacity building, we were able to get into phase 2, which looked at several interventions, and finally in the scaling up of those innovations. And so one of the things, if you look at this slide, and I'm not an agronomist so I'm not going to pretend either, but you'll find that when one of the things that the project was able to do in terms of helping the farmers was to help them to leverage, for example, the farmers would pull, at the end of the season, would pull everything up, roots and all. And so they had nothing then to build on or to help to improve the soil. And one of the things you'll see in this slide is that they were able to increase the soil health and fertility because they were taught how to keep some of those roots there and what was important about keeping those roots. We talk about in this slide agronomic packages, and the project itself did several things. So the root was one, but also land preparation in the agronomic package, land preparation, tilling practices, sowing practices, fertilizers, how to control this, how to management practices is what they would say. And because they were able, the farmers then who really followed those practices are the farmers that we would see with fields. Chickpeas varieties, for example, that has a zinc application, fertilizer application, is what you see on the left. And on the right side, my right side, what you're seeing is a farmer's field day. So a lot happened, not just to give them the package, but also a lot of training went into the program. The agronomic practice is looking at best varieties, I think. I think for farmers, we had the traditional varieties, and now we were looking at chickpeas, we were looking at common beans, haricot beans, and what they needed are varieties then that they could sell, that would bring an income to them. And so they were looking at high-yielding varieties. And for this, the project worked with several of the research institutions in southern Ethiopia in order to obtain the varieties and also to obtain the inoculants. And by doing that, we found that those high-yielding varieties, Habru, I think was one of them in chickpeas, that they were all able to increase the yield compared to the local varieties. Intercropping, of course, making much more efficient use of the soil by planting. So we got wheat, and after the wheats were harvested, they were able to plant chickpeas or beans, right? And those intercropping then really was quite helpful. So those were some of the things that we did going forward in terms of agriculture. So here's an example. I think that's what I just talked about. Here's an example of the haricot beans. Another thing that we did, there were the farmers' school, but another thing in farmers' school that happened is that the farmers themselves, the project or the farmers themselves would bring other farmers to observe what was happening, and that was very good because I think farmers needed to see that these new varieties were going to work for them, and so they came to see in some of the meetings that we've had and ask how that was going, especially in female farmers. They would share that other farmers would come to look at their practices and then would ask them if they could exchange the traditional chickpeas or haricot beans so that they could use that for household use, and if they could exchange that for some of the new varieties. And it was understood that the new varieties then were good for income, and so that was one of the things that they did. In terms of nutrition, when we started out, and if you look at some of that, you'll find that diet diversity, or what we're suggesting here, is that in rural areas, they had limited amount, like cooking practices were limited, and so what we had to do was help them to develop recipes that would provide for them not just only one food item, like for example cereal, but a recipe for complementary food, for example, would have cereal grain, a percentage of pulse, and also may have kale, which is one of the common vegetable. And so we taught women how to mix those so that they could increase the diversity and not necessarily have to cook 3 dishes. And so what you're seeing on that slide is that as the years go on, we found that diet diversity had increased, and part of that had to do with the increase in knowledge, increase in education, but also increase in skill building. So the preparation of food. So not only teach them, but also show them how to do it. Well, interestingly, in one of the interviews that I did, one of the female farmer was saying to me that, you know, for chickpeas, she'd always gone to the market and she saw chickpeas. She didn't know what it was or what to do with it. But working with the project, she was able to find out that they're edible and how to cook them. She said the new variety took a little bit longer to cook, but she said they taste good. Now, if I asked the male farmer, they said, you know, the new varieties are missing something. So it really depends. But what we were finding out is that by doing the education along with and doing it at the time when the farmers feel, so that we were training both the male and female farmers, we found that that had increased diet diversity in the household. The other thing, and we heard the discussion this morning about iron and the importance of iron and the importance of increasing bioavailability. And this is one of our PhD student, Dr. Bob Tyler, and myself co-supervise, that's looking at here at the University of Saskatchewan, that's looking at various ways to increase biodiversity in the food. And this is important because in Canada, we eat a variety of food, and because we eat a variety of food, sometimes that cancels out, right? And so we're not as concerned that we're not going to get iron from this area, because once you're eating a variety, it's going to cancel out. When you're talking, though, about Ethiopia, you're talking about rural Ethiopia, you're talking about subsistence farming, when you're not having the same diverse diet, then this becomes important. And so we're looking at the impact of roasting, which is very commonly used in Ethiopia, particularly around haricot beans for different functions, boiling, soaking, fermentation, and germination. And we understood that germination used to be used quite commonly, but now it's not used as well. And so we're bringing some of these practices back. And so we're looking then at how we can improve the nutritional quality of these pulses through and their bioavailability of nutrients. The other thing that is interesting is the whole area of improving snacks. So this particular one connects us with an industry partner. So here's an industry partner who's experimenting with pulse, with wheat, with different cereals. And we are part of that process, looking at the percentage, for example, that makes good sense. For one example of that was when we were looking at complementary foods. And one evening, we were doing a sensory analysis. The graduate students thought 60% cereal, 40% pulse, makes a good tasty snack. Well, when the children got it, they said, oh no. So they want the 30-70 worked better. So we've had that kind of sensory evaluation going forward. And on this slide, you'll notice that we've got corn and chickpeas, 60-40, chickpeas and sorghum, looking at ways then that we can introduce nutritious snacks into the community. Isaias, again, is a PhD student here at the University of Saskatchewan that's working on this project. The important thing of this project is that we've not only worked on it in the lab, but these snacks have been developed, and women today, the Leaky women, are now selling them from house to house. And that's interesting because what we wanted to do is to make sure that that they were applied, that they could be used in the community. And we find that these women, with training in business, with training in marketing and so forth, are going door to door and are getting very, very good responses from using these snacks. And here is where the Bureau of Women, Children and Youth comes in, because through our corporations there's cooperatives that are being set up, they're able to have women work together, like 5 together, so forth, and through the cooperative they receive the training and also the kind of support that's going to help them to do well. These are just an examples of the studies that we have done in terms of intervention studies. And one of the things we looked at is what were mothers doing with the complementary foods that they've received? Would education improve the practice? A number of these studies have been published, and what we found in the studies that knowledge for sure improved. One of the posters by Afwerk, who's here, is out in the poster session, and he's gone back and looked a year or two later and said, well, our knowledge, hasn't we retained knowledge? And he's finding out, yes, the women have retained knowledge. They've also retained some practices, and now we're beginning to look further as what are the needs do they have in order to sustain that. This is talking about improving knowledge, attitude, and practice using multiple learning modes. And the learning modes that we have used are the Government Extension System. Farm Radio International has been really great for us in helping us to spread those messages. And you notice that women of all ages have tuned in. Women, as you see, are working together. Dr. Bruce Coleman and I were there last year, and we went to one place where we found women who were not even part of the study area, but they had heard the message through Farm Radio International. They went to the Bureau of Agriculture and said, look, we want some seeds also so we can plant. And we were able to visit those, so that when we say that it goes beyond the study area, it does. I drew this diagram because Dr. Morris Maloney who is a part of our project, who is one of our scientific advisors, talks about the integrated project. And the African continent, or the proverb said, it does take a village to raise a child. And if you notice, we started out with pulse production. We have talked about developing nutrient-enriched food, nutrition education. That's very important. But we also look at some of the cross-cutting issues of gender and how that works as well. And our recent speaker talks about that value chain. It's a value chain approach, which we so much agree with. The cluster approach I thought I would talk a little bit about, because that's one of the successes of the project. And in Ethiopia, a lot of the farmers only have, say, 0.25 hectares of land. Small crops of land, but they're needing to feed their family. And a lot of time, these are the women who have these small crops of land. So one thing the project has done is use the cluster approach, where you get 5 farmers together. Those 5 farmers may be 3 male, 2 women, or 4 male, 1 woman, depending on where we are. And what we found is that really brings synergy, so that they can work together, they train together, they look out for each other. And that cluster approach has really, really made a difference for a number of farmers. And so one of the areas that last year I went to visit one of our grad students. She was doing nutrition education in one of the areas. And the women were talking about, you've taught us what to do, and we can do that. But what we do need are the resources. And so I asked them if we were to give you 1 or 2 kilograms of seeds, would you plant it? And they said yes. And so we gave them 2 kilograms of seeds. The researchers from Hawassa University, they went down and helped them gave them the training, provided fertilizers, etc. And maybe about 6 months later, when I went back and asked how they were doing, some of the ladies from that 2 kilograms of seeds, had reaped 80 kilograms of haricot bean, 70 kilograms, 50 kilograms, 30 kilograms. And it's not just that they have reaped this. You ask them, what are their plans for use? And some said, we're going to eat some of it. We're going to save some for next year so that we will have beans, and we're also going to sell some so that we will be able to take care of our household. But an important thing that they said, well, how has that really impacted decision making in the house? And a couple ladies said, before we did that, our husbands would sell pretty much most what we had. But now we're equal partners. So we talk about decisions of what to sell, what to keep, and how to eat. And I think for us that was important, because I think one of the issues in the project sites in southern Ethiopia is the issue of women in empowerment, and how do we empower women to make decisions. And the slide that you're looking at says there are 6 farmers, right, from Soda, and one of the farmers, when we asked him how things were going, he said the female farmer was doing better than him because she had one of these machines that could weed. And so not just so that was also important, having the kind of resources that's going to help. This one goes slower. A little bit. Okay, thanks. So a number of things. One of the things we look at is climate change and its resilience, and how pulse makes a difference with that. And I'm not going to go through these because time is running out, but I'm simply saying that in scaling up, we're looking at a number of we've looked at a number of large interventions and have had great success with those as well. Farm radio I've talked about, and I probably will just end with some of the stories from the field, where when asked how things are going for them, this particular farmer said, chickpeas enabled me to use my limited land efficiently, and that was important. Another story from the field you can read, where farmers are saying how they have benefited from the project and the men. It is a fairly complex project, and narrowing it down has been quite difficult. But one of the things that we can say is that the work that we are doing, have made quite a difference in the lives of our farmers, both male and female. We've gone from 10 farmers 10 years ago to 40% of our farmers, the 70,000 are female farmers, and we think that is one of the evidence of success. I will stop there because I think time is running out.